voyage. It sounded easy enough, but Jackson had no idea just how much this trip would change his life. He hadn't expected to feel so out of place among the alien delegates, each one more advanced and elegant than anything he had ever seen. But it was the one woman in the room who stole his attention. She entered the hall with grace, her presence undeniable. Queen Saphira, the ruler of the Xantheon Empire, was not like the others. Her aura filled the room before her body even did. She moved with an elegance that was almost otherworldly, her long, flowing robes shimmering with a faint, iridescent glow. Her violet eyes scanned the room as though she could see through everything, past every barrier, every secret, and then their eyes met. Jackson's heart stopped. It was an instant connection, a feeling as if the universe itself had reached out to intertwine their fates. He didn't understand it, couldn't explain it, but there was no denying it. The moment she looked at him, it felt as if the world around him had disappeared, leaving only the two of them in this strange, intimate moment. The Xantheon Queen's gaze was intense. She didn't look away. There was something in her eyes that Jackson couldn't quite place. Something far deeper than curiosity. He thought she might be appraising him, trying to understand what made him stand out from the other humans present. But there was also something else, a knowing look, as though she had seen him before, or perhaps expected him. Saphira was standing at the center of the room now, surrounded by her council. They were all discussing the future of their people, the delicate alliances that held their empire together. Jackson, despite his better judgment, found himself unable to focus on anything other than her. He had met important people before, but none like her. She was different. There was a strange pull that kept drawing him toward her. Without realizing it, he took a step forward, crossing the distance between them. "Human engineer," a voice called out. It wasn't the Queen, but one of her attendants. Jackson snapped his attention away from Saphira and turned to the voice. A slender alien woman, her skin pale like polished stone, gave him a polite nod. "You are needed in the engineering sector," she said in a soft, melodic tone. Jackson nodded quickly, embarrassed to have been caught staring. He turned away, but the sensation of her gaze remained. It felt like a silent whisper tugging at him, pulling him back to where she stood. As he left the grand hall, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in that brief moment. The way Saphira had looked at him. It wasn't just curiosity or politeness. It was as if she had recognized something about him, something beyond the surface. The corridors of the ship were quiet, and Jackson had time to collect his thoughts. He could hardly focus on the task ahead. His mind kept returning to the Queen. Why had she looked at him like that? What was the strange connection he felt? He shook his head. It didn't make sense. He made his way to the engineering deck, where his team was working on the maintenance systems. The familiar hum of the ship's engines filled the air, grounding him back in reality. Still, he couldn't push the image of Saphira from his mind. The way she moved, the way she held herself. It was like watching a being from another world, both physically and emotionally. He'd never met anyone like her before. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Jackson tried to focus on his work, but every few moments, his thoughts wandered back to Saphira. He couldn't help it. She had an air of mystery, of power, that was unlike anything he had encountered. He wondered if she felt the same strange pull toward him. He doubted it, but the thought lingered. It was late when he finally returned to his quarters. The lights of the ship flickered outside his window as it sailed through the depths of space. Jackson sat down on the edge of the bed, exhausted, but restless. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed, trying to calm his racing thoughts. But no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was connected to something bigger now, something beyond his understanding. And then, as if on cue, the communication panel by his bed lit up. "Jackson!" The voice was unmistakable. It was Saphira. He sat up straight, heart pounding. His mind raced. Had she somehow sensed his thoughts? How had she known to contact him? Her voice echoed through the room, soft yet firm. "I need to speak with you. In private." Jackson's heart beat faster as the communication panel flickered again. The voice of Queen Saphira had a mysterious, calm quality that sent shivers down his spine. He had barely processed the words before he was up and moving toward the panel, his mind still trying to catch up with what had just happened. What did she want? Why now? He pressed the button to accept the communication, and the screen lit up with the image of the Queen. Her presence on the screen was as powerful as it had been when she entered the grand hall. The violet glow of her eyes seemed to pierce through the dim light of his quarters, leaving him breathless. "Jackson," she said, her voice rich and smooth. "I need you to meet me. There is something we must discuss, something only you can help with." He hesitated for a moment, still trying to comprehend the gravity of the situation. Why him? Why now? It was a simple request, but the urgency in her tone made it anything but. "Of course," Jackson finally replied, his voice steady, though he could feel his pulse quicken. "Where would you like to meet?" Saphira's expression softened just slightly, a hint of a smile touching the corners of her lips. "The observation deck. It's quiet there, and it will give us a moment of peace away from the chaos." Jackson nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over him despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. There was something about the Queen, something that made him want to be near her, even though he knew very little about her. His mind raced, but his feet carried him toward the observation deck without question. There was no turning back now. The corridors of the ship were eerily silent as Jackson walked toward the designated location. The hum of the ship's systems was distant, almost as though the vessel itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was about to unfold. His mind replayed the brief encounter they had earlier when their eyes met across the crowded hall. There had been something undeniably powerful in that moment, something that connected them in a way he couldn't explain. When he arrived at the observation deck, the large windows framed the vastness of space beyond, the stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across a dark velvet sky. The view was breathtaking, but Jackson barely noticed. His eyes were drawn to the figure standing in front of the window, gazing out into the infinite expanse. Queen Saphira. She turned as she sensed him approaching, her gaze meeting his with that same knowing look that had unsettled him earlier. This time, however, there was no distance between them, no formality. It was just the two of them, standing in the quiet, weightless space of the observation deck. The air felt charged, alive with an energy neither of them had spoken of. "You came," she said, her voice soft, yet there was an undeniable strength in it. It was a voice that commanded attention, but there was a certain gentleness now that made Jackson feel, for the first time, that he could speak freely with her. "I couldn't ignore your call," Jackson replied, his words coming out more honestly than he had planned. He hadn't meant to sound so open, but something in her presence made it impossible to hide how he felt. Saphira's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to him, her movements fluid, like a graceful shadow. "You don't understand, do you?" she asked, her tone not accusing, but searching. "You don't understand why you feel this pull between us." Jackson swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He had thought about it, wondered about it more times than he could count. The way she made him feel, the way his heart seemed to race whenever she was near, it wasn't normal. It couldn't be. It was as if their connection was destined, as if it had been written in the stars, long before they ever met. "I don't," he admitted, looking down at the floor for a moment. "But I can't ignore it. Something's different when I'm around you." Saphira nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "It's because you and I are bound together by something greater than either of us, a force you don't yet understand, but one that is undeniable." She paused, her gaze shifting toward the stars. "I've seen it. My visions have shown me this moment. You, standing here with me, as if fate itself had planned it." Jackson's mind raced. "Visions? You mean you've seen me before?" Not just you, she replied softly. I've seen the course of events, how they will unfold. The future is not set in stone, but I've glimpsed the threads, and I know that you have a part to play in what's to come. Not just as a bystander, but as someone who will shape the future. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jackson had never believed in fate, never thought much of visions or prophecies, but standing here with Saphira, hearing her speak of them with such certainty, he couldn't help but wonder if perhaps there was some truth to it all. What do you need from me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. He knew the answer would change everything. Whatever it was clear that his life, the quiet life he had known before, was slipping away. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Saphira turned fully toward him, her presence overwhelming, her eyes alight with something Jackson couldn't quite name. I need your help, she said. There are enemies within my empire who seek to destroy everything I've built. My visions have shown me their plans, but I cannot face them alone. I need you, Jackson. Your strength, your courage. Only you can help me stop them. Jackson looked at her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. He had never imagined his life would lead him here, to this moment, standing beside an alien queen who spoke of visions and destiny. But something in him stirred, something that went beyond logic or reason. He couldn't deny it. He couldn't walk away. Tell me what to do, he said, his voice firm, though his heart was still racing. Saphira's lips curled into a smile, one that held both relief and something else, something deeper. I knew you would say that, she said softly. Together we will change the course of this empire. Together we will face what's to come. As Jackson looked at her, standing tall and unwavering, he felt something stir inside him. A connection that went far beyond anything he had ever imagined. It was a promise, unspoken but clear. He would stand by her no matter what. Because for the first time, he realized he wasn't just fighting for her or the empire. He was fighting for himself, for a future he had never expected, but now could not live without. The ship was in chaos. It had been a few days since Jackson and Queen Saphira had met on the observation deck, and since then, the pressure on the Xantheon Empire had only grown. Whispers of rebellion had reached the Queen's ears, and it wasn't long before Jackson found himself drawn into the middle of a conspiracy that threatened not just the Queen's reign, but the safety of the entire galaxy. Jackson had been trained in technical systems, not politics or espionage. Yet here he was, in the heart of the Empire, facing a danger he could never have imagined. The stakes were high. Queen Saphira had made it clear that only together could they defeat the enemies within her ranks. The weight of that responsibility was heavy on his shoulders. But Jackson couldn't deny the pull between them. He had made his choice. There was no going back now. Saphira's eyes had seen beyond what anyone else could. She had been preparing for this day. A day when the future would be shaped by a decision made in the present. And Jackson was at the center of it all. A man from Earth who, just weeks ago, had never dreamed of standing next to an alien queen, much less fighting by her side. The queen had gathered her closest advisors in a hidden chamber, away from the public eye. Jackson was there, his mind racing with the details of the mission ahead. There were forces within the Empire, high-ranking officials, who sought to take the throne for themselves. They had infiltrated the council and built a quiet network of power that was now rising to the surface. Saphira had learned of it through her visions, and she knew that if she didn't act quickly, it would be too late. The time for subtlety had passed. She needed to strike fast, and Jackson, whether he was ready or not, had a role to play in this fight. The room was dimly lit, and the atmosphere felt tense. It was a meeting unlike any other Jackson had ever been a part of. The walls, decorated with ancient symbols and alien art, seemed to close in around them as Saphira stood at the center, commanding the attention of the room. "Jackson," she said, her voice steady and confident, "I need you to trust me. We must act swiftly, before the enemies within my empire can gain any more ground." Jackson looked at her, his heart racing. "You don't need to ask. I'm with you." Saphira nodded, her gaze softening for just a moment. "I know, and that is why I trust you. But the task ahead is not simple. We must move quickly. If we are to defeat them, we need to strike before they can launch their full attack." Jackson wasn't sure what kind of attack she was talking about, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't back out now. He had been pulled into a world beyond his understanding, but he would stand by Saphira. Whatever it took, he was ready. The sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. A door opened, and another advisor entered. It was Ryak, the commander of the Xanthion Royal Guard. His tall frame and stern expression seemed out of place in the quiet, delicate space of the room. "Your Majesty," Ryak said with a bow, his voice respectful but firm. "The preparations are complete." "We are ready." Saphira nodded. "Good. Let's move forward." Ryak turned to Jackson. "We have a plan to infiltrate their stronghold. You will be the key to it." Jackson blinked, confused. "Me? How?" Ryak gave him a serious look. "You, Jackson, are the one they least expect. You are an outsider, someone they don't know, and that makes you our greatest asset. We need to get inside their inner circle. If you can get close enough, we can dismantle them from the inside." Jackson nodded, though he wasn't sure he understood everything. His role in this battle was still unclear, but he trusted Saphira. She had seen this moment in her visions. He was part of something much bigger than himself. The plan was set in motion. Jackson, accompanied by Ryak and a small team of Xanthian soldiers, would infiltrate a high-profile event where the enemies were gathering. It was a risky move, but they had no choice. Time was running out. The night of the event arrived, and Jackson found himself standing in front of the Grand Palace, surrounded by the stars. The moonlight illuminated the path before him, and the distant hum of the ship's engines was a constant reminder of how far he had come from the quiet life he had once known. He had come a long way since that first encounter with Saphira, and now he was about to play a pivotal role in the fate of the Empire. The palace was alive with activity, filled with dignitaries and high-ranking officials. Jackson felt out of place among them, but the mission was clear. He was to find the leaders of the conspiracy and expose them before they could strike. But the deeper he went into the heart of the palace, the more uneasy he became. The whispers of betrayal that had haunted him for days now seemed real, as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. Ryak led the way, his eyes constantly scanning the room. Jackson followed closely behind, his pulse quickening with each step. The voices of the conspirators were growing louder, and it wasn't long before Jackson found himself face to face with one of them. General Lyros was a tall, imposing figure who commanded respect. He had been one of Saphira's trusted allies, but Jackson had learned through his research that Lyros was now secretly working against her. The general had made it clear that he would stop at nothing to take the throne for himself. Jackson's heart raced as he approached the general, his hand instinctively reaching for the small device hidden beneath his jacket. It was a communication tool, one that would allow him to send a signal to Saphira and her team if things went wrong. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew he had to keep his cool. "General," Jackson said, keeping his voice steady, though his hands were trembling. "It's an honor to meet you. I've heard a great deal about you." Lyros turned to face him, his eyes cold and calculating. "I'm sure you have. The Xanthion Empire has a long history, one that I intend to protect, but it's not always easy, is it? Not when those in power are weak." Jackson tried not to show his surprise at the general's words. It was clear now that the conspiracy ran deeper than he had thought. Lyros was testing him, seeing if he would react. Jackson couldn't let that happen. "I'm just here to help," Jackson replied, his voice calm. "I want to see the Empire thrive." Lyros smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We all want that, don't we? But some of us are willing to take the necessary steps to ensure it. The conversation was over. Jackson could feel it in the air. The general knew who he was, and he knew that Jackson was working with Saphira. The trap had been set. Before Jackson could react, a loud crash echoed through the hall. The doors to the chamber flew open, and a group of armed guards stormed in. It was chaos. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest as he dove for cover, the sounds of gunfire and shouting filling the air. The betrayal had begun. In the midst of the chaos, Jackson's eyes met Saphira's from across the room. She was surrounded by her guards, her expression focused and determined. She had known this was coming. She had seen it in her visions. Jackson knew what he had to do. He had to protect her. He had to stop this before it was too late.